All right, thank you. So Renee, Renee's kind of going to be the facilitator and I'm going to be the content guy. So Renee, do you have any opening remarks before I just kind of get into the agenda?
Not necessarily, but this is just, this is an opportunity. As you know, everybody has a lot of questions around AB 1491 and what changes it is going to bring about. And so this is an opportunity, much like CAIA and CCAE offered last week in the legislative update, to be able to offer ideas and thoughts around AB 1491 and what supports perhaps Cape TAP could provide for you as we're moving forward. So this is meant to be truly a discussion, a roundtable discussion, more so than a sit and get. So please make sure that you're actively involved with the chat, and I will be the one trying to monitor the chat, as well as when it's appropriate to do so, come off of chat and use the video feature. And with that, we'll just keep going.
All right, thanks, Renee. So quickly, my name's Neil Kelly. I'm with the CDE, formerly of the Chancellor's Office, formerly with CDE before that, 15 years in adult ed. So I wanted to have this today. I wanted to go over the language that's in the bill to really tease out what does it say, what does it mean, and then kind of lay out what the resources we currently have, and then open it up for discussion on, what further tools do we need? What other, like Renee was saying, technical assistance or professional development do we need for this effort? And then some feedback for the state. What should that guidance look like? I know Caroline and Gary Adams talked about releasing that in January. So what should that guidance look like? What should it include? And then any other concerns, fears, or insights you want to share in this roundtable? So with that, let's talk about the language. So I'm going to break this up into two parts, the member language and then the consortium language. So the member language says AB 1491 would authorize a consortium to reduce a member's allocation by no more than the amount of the member's carryover. So it authorizes, and these are my comments, authorizes, not mandate. So it gives the consortium and their members the ability to reduce a member's allocation. And then the second point I wanted to make in this, reduce funds by no more than the carryover, which would be the ceiling, but there's no bottom mentioned. So they don't say what the minimum amount is. They just say the maximum amount would be by no more than the amount of the members' carryover. So that was kind of interesting. So I guess this gives the consortium and its members some flexibility on that reduction piece as I'm seeing there. So I'm going to move on to the next part. And then the other part for members, it says if the consortium makes a finding by a majority vote based on the member having excessive carryover for at least 2 consecutive fiscal years beginning with 22-23 fiscal year. So takeaways there, has to be a majority vote, has to be 2 consecutive years, and that would be 22-23, 23-24. So that first vote could be taken no earlier than October of 2024 once Q4 is certified, because that would be the 2nd consecutive year. So for member funding reduction, you do have some time to work through this. So we're looking, October 2024 would be the day of reckoning for some of these members. So just projecting that out. I'm going to pause there to see if anybody had any comments or questions about the member part. We're just focusing on the member part right now. I don't know, Renee, anything in the chat? No comments, no questions?
So Rachel Bramlett just said excessive is anything 20% or higher, right? Or is there a definition?
So that's consortium. We're only dealing with member. The 20% does not factor into the member language. So the 20% is only related to the consortium. That's why I separated it out, because people were getting confused about the 20% and the member reduction and this and that. So that's why I really got down to the language and dissected it. And so just going back, you can only reduce it by the amount of carryover. That's the max. The minimum is whatever the consortium decides. So it's really up to you on that reduction piece. And don't get confused with the 20%. That's a different part of this bill. Any other questions or comments, Renee?
Not at this time.
Okay, so let's go on to the 20% piece. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Okay, here are my takeaways. Sorry to get you excited about the 20% piece. So it says, these are my takeaways. Need to be clear in your consortium governance how you plan to implement this, because that's the language. We just read through the language. It leaves a lot of room for you guys to interpret, to put some guidance out there. I mean, we'll provide some guidance, but we're not going to tell you how to reduce your members' funding. It's going to be up to you how that process is going to work, how your governance is going to work, the voting, decision-making, all that is really going to be put on you and your governance structure. So I would, first point, need to be clear in your governance, how you plan to implement this. And then also, I mean, the state can help with this and Cape TAP can help. Need to track at-risk members for consecutive years. So, and we'll get into the tools and we'll talk about this. Need to have safeguards in place to prevent frivolous spending to avoid carryover. So if you have a member that's like, oh my goodness, I'm at risk, and they start buying crazy stuff, or you see them, purchasing stuff that is not reasonable and necessary, you have to have those safeguards in place as the consortia director or as the consortia as a group. Somehow you have to prevent that frivolous spending to avoid the carryover spend down. And then consortia needs to fill in gaps on how much will be reduced back to that minimum maximum. What is the voting process? It says majority vote, but you have bylaws on your voting. So what does that look like? What's the timetable for those check-ins to track those at-risk members? And then what are potential carryover funded projects that align with the AE plan? So let's say I'm a member and I fall in the carryover bucket, but I was carrying over $1 million in consortia wide spending projects. Should I be punished? So you have to be aware of, what's going on in your consortia, who's keeping money for consortia level expenditures, consortia admin. So all that should come into play when you're looking at this data. And that's why the flexibility is there for you to determine if this is a legitimate carryover overage and they need to be reduced, or maybe it requires further analysis because they might be holding money for the consortia. They might be doing a regional marketing, or it could be a capital outlay or something. So it's not black and white. You have to kind of look at the situation. And then what are the risks by doing nothing? Let's say you say, well, it doesn't really say for us to do this. And that would lead us into what Rachel said is the 20% rule, is the consortia level. So if you allow members to not manage their carryover, you're going to be bumping up against that 20% threshold as a consortia pretty soon. And so we'll get into that, but I'm going to pause there after my takeaways to see, Renee, if there were any comments or questions.
Yes, we do have quite a few questions. So both Dana Galloway and Francisco Pineda asked about the excessive carryover and how that's defined. So Dana says, so excessive carryover at the member level is not defined. It's up to the group. And then Francisco said, so then consortiums should set their own minimum and maximum carryovers.
So the maximum you can take away is the amount of carryover. Any amount of carryover is the maximum. The minimum you can decide. So let's say I've got $1 million of carryover for 2 consecutive years. Are you going to swipe that $1 million and reallocate it? Maybe. Or maybe you say, we're going to take 50% of that, or 25% of that, or 10% of that. It's really up to you to determine what that minimum is versus what that maximum is. So you have some parameters. You could take it all, anything over as far as carryover, or you could take something less than that, because it doesn't say you have to take all of it. It says you can take up to, all the carryover after 2 consecutive years, but it doesn't mandate you do that. So you guys have to figure that out of what's acceptable within your consortium. And then any other questions, Renee?
Yes, Shannon Eller asks, when does the finding take place? Maybe when does this all go into effect?
So it goes into effect now. And so we'll be creating reports. And so what we'll do is probably October 2023, a year from now, we'll run reports, say, oh, who's got carryover, who's at risk, and then, probably provide some technical assistance and this and that for consortia that are requesting it, so they don't wind up as 2 consecutive years at risk. So that's why that October 2024 date is critical, because that's the 2 consecutive years. If that helps, I think that answers your question.
Good.
Anything?
And then Lanzi Asturias says, aside from a full audit of each district's expenditures, how would one monitor frivolous spending?
Good question. I mean, because the role of the consortium director and staff is really to make sure you're adhering to the adult ed plan. I guess, you don't have to, but the risk of not monitoring that spending could lead to other unintended consequences. And I know it's sensitive to dig into somebody's expenditures and budgets. I don't know. Lanzi, I would ask other consortia directors maybe for how they monitor members' expenditures for maybe frivolous spending, because I think it's sensitive in nature that you're going to have variation around the state. Some people are hands off, some people are hands on. So I think that needs further, examination, I would say. I don't have an answer for that, but good question. I know that's sensitive in nature looking at someone's books, but you might get to the point when we get into the next slide talking about consortia where the state will look at your books and will open every member in your consortia. And we'll talk about that next. Anything else there, Renee?
There is a lot more, but I think maybe some of it will be addressed as we move forward. So
Okay.
if people don't mind, we'll maybe hold on to it and then just make sure we have a lot of time for discussion of what's in the chat as we're moving along.
Okay. And then a disclaimer is this is a roundtable discussion. These are my take on it. This isn't necessarily the state position. So we're having this dialogue, open dialogue. And so take that with a grain of salt that we're having this discussion, but it's good food for thought to have these discussions and get stuff out in the open to start contemplating, what's going to happen. Just like, that question about the frivolous spending. What does that mean? How do we safeguard this and that? Good question, So let's go on to the next part where it gets even juicier. So AB 1491 would require a consortia with carryover, I'm blocking, from one or more prior fiscal year exceeding 20% to, you would have to submit a written plan to the chancellor and the superintendent. And then you would be assigned technical assistance to that consortia to ensure the adequate adult ed services are provided to the region in proportion to the region's available funding. So that seems harmless. You get into let's see here. The next part, let's see, wait, did I go too far? Okay, assigned, okay. So takeaways here, this would begin in October 2023, so this month. And then 12 months from now, after Q4 is certified, we would be looking at who's over that 20%. So that's coming up really quick. That's 12 months from now, or, you know, we're already within that spending year. So it sounds like when it says this last clause, assign technical assistance to ensure the adequate adult ed services are providing the region and proportionate to regions available funding. To me, that sounds like kind of like an audit to look at the spending plan of the consortium, to review the services being offered in the region, and to see if it aligns with the region's available funding. So what that could mean, I'm not saying it does mean this, but if you're one of those consortium that go over the 20%, you know, and come on the list, so to speak, in October of next year, we're going to look at your spending plan. We're going to look at the services being offered in the region, and we're going to see what your funding is. So let's say your member gets $300,000, but has, you know, 20 students. That's not going to be good. Or let's say you're a community college and you have you fund navigators and transition specialists, but then you have all this kind of admin. You know, you've got all this admin salaries. That's not going to look good. What does that mean? What are they doing? So the state, I'm not sure the level of review here, but it could get into that. What are you purchasing? What are you doing with this money? Hey, why do you have so few instructional hours? Oh, what's this purchase? You know, those kind of things. So that does give the state kind of carte blanche to go in and conduct a review of that consortia and their members, because it doesn't say, you know, just at the consortia level. If we do a review at the consortia, that would include the members as well. So you got to be careful of that. And then also my last comment would be, this doesn't preclude the state from taking further action. I mean, an ed code allows the state to draw the boundaries of the consortium or the consortia. And so they could maybe change those boundaries if they don't like, you know, if a consortia keeps coming up over and over again, over the 20%, maybe they'll make some changes. And there's also the ability to make changes. Who knows? I mean, so they have the ability to go a little farther with this, and the ed code would support it. So we have to be careful there. If you get on that consortium list, having the state involvement. Now, I'm not going to say that's going to happen. And if you have an aggressive state policy, that could happen. But I just wanted to point that out to everyone, that this language allows for something like that to take place. And so we'll see what happens in the state level guidance. So I'm going to pause there to see if we had questions or comments on the consortium language.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of comments about whether training will be available, guidance, guidance from the state, guidance from TAP, how that guidance will come out. Will it be an update to the fiscal guide, or will it come out separately? So I think in yesterday's opening, Carolyn and Gary referenced a release of guidance in January related to AB 1491. So I won't probably dwell too much on the requests for assistance, because I will capture this chat, and we'll certainly be taking it back to my team to see how we do provide support and guidance around AB 1491 in the form of webinars and trainings and so on that you guys are suggesting here. But John Werner had a question that I thought we could go back to. He said, Neil, a question has come up regarding one-time fund transfers between members in a way that does not rebench their annual allocation for future years. We have done that, I believe, via allocation amendments in the past. There are also other ways to do it as fund transfers between members. Will you discuss some tools for moving funds? Yeah, I mean, so when we do our NOVA webinars, Veronica
is kind of our expert in walking everyone through the allocation amendment process. And so you would have to do that allocation amendment after the CFAD is approved and after the funds are certified. And then once you get your funds, then you can move it around. You know, if you're a fiscal agent, maybe a little easier to move it around, but as a direct funded, you would have to, you know, make the allocation amendment in Nova and then physically either wire transfer or walk a check around the region to the other members to make sure that funds get transferred. Because we don't do the fund transfer, we can't change the schedules once they are set in the CFAD. And so those are things that we could we have existing webinars on that, and we probably need to revisit that, but there are strategies and tools that you can use to make sure to avoid that 20%. Because the 20% that, you know, we're not going to think about, like, if someone says, oh, that's, you know, we had some consortia-wide expenditures. I don't think that's going to play into like giving you a break on the 20%. And so there's no caveats in the language to say like, this is only this type of, you know, carryover. It's everything. So if you were having a building or something, you were saving millions of dollars, I mean, that's going to come up. That would play into when the state reviews it, but that still wouldn't get you off the list. You know what I mean? So I don't know, John, did that answer your question? I mean, we're going to have further follow-up on the tools, and that's probably in the next slide as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just a couple more questions and then we can keep going. Is the 20% the sum of all the members?
Yes.
And all this will be viewed in Nova by the state?
Yes, I've already put a list together for the Chancellor's Office of Nova changes. We could probably add more from this conversation and other conversations, but there should be tools in Nova that will allow you to monitor that 20% to see where you're at. Mm-hmm. And hopefully those get into place at the time of the release of the guidance, but programming changes in Nova take a long time. So we'll see how those align going into the spring. So you might want to think about other mechanisms on how to track, you know, maybe develop your own tracking method and not rely on the state, you know, coming out with something soon. I mean, we'll eventually come out with something, but I would say as a safeguard, have some of your own strategies to make sure you're monitoring this stuff, if that makes any sense. And maybe Cape TAP can help. And another question, I don't want to get into this, but I don't know how the CC TAP would play into this. Are they just going to do the community college focused ones, the consortia run by community college? I have no idea how that would play out. They're very confusing, but something to work through or think about at the state level for technical assistance, who's doing what.
For sure. When you refer to the state, Neil, who are you specifically referring to?
Me and Carolyn, Gary, Myra, that state, Chancellor's Office and CDE. Unless people thought I was some other kind of entity, you know, like just Cape Guru on an island somewhere. No, I'm CDE. So.
Perfect. Todd Haig is saying, Neil, these last few comments, are they a broader approach to oversight and auditing beyond the issue of carryover?
What does he mean by that? You mean the issues of when the state looks at things? Is that what taken in that context?
I would think so, but maybe Todd wants to come off of mute.
Yeah, Todd.
Yeah, sorry, and thank you. Yeah, a little bit earlier before all the questions started getting addressed, you were talking about auditing and oversight and maybe the state kind of asking for clarification or questioning, hey, look at all these positions, yet your enrollment is really small. Mm-hmm. Is that beyond the context of carryover? Is that something that was coming regardless, that kind of maybe increased oversight?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so, Todd. We weren't going to go down that road, but I think this opens up the ability to the state to look to do that. Now, we don't have the resources to do that, and that's something we'll have to grapple with because there's just, a handful of us. And so I don't know if, we'll have to discuss this at the state level, where the resources to do something like this and how many consortia are we talking about? If we're talking like 30 consortia, I don't know how we're going to have the bandwidth to do that level of auditing. So we'll see. Nothing concrete there, but we weren't planning to do this, but this does open the door for that kind of scrutiny.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and Janae Crane has asked if we can go back to the previous slide, please. And then Janae, I don't know if you want to come off of mute and ask a question.
Oh,
There's
hi,
the
thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted a little further clarification. So Neil, what you're saying then is that, so the total amount of carryover for every agency can't exceed 20%. So you would add up the
Right,
percentage
right,
of
yeah.
all your agencies and it can't exceed 20%.
Yeah, so let's say you have like 6 agencies and all 5 of them are doing great. They have no carryover, but you got one that's not doing anything and they're the biggest one, and all of a sudden they're bumping you to the 20%. So it would be the total of all those members.
Okay, or if you had 4 of them and they all had 5%,
Yeah,
then that would hit
Yeah.
you at the 20.
yeah, that too. But hopefully we'll have reports. See, I mean, all this is timing, but I would imagine we'd have reports in Nova that would show your progress towards that threshold. But I don't know what the timing is for making those available, since we haven't had any discussions with programmers for Nova yet. So that's why I was just suggesting maybe have your own backup, just in case. Start looking at that now. And don't wait for the state to come out with a tool, because it might take a long time for us to get that to you. Okay, I'm going to move on.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, here are the current tools. Oh, Renee, how are we doing on time?
We have about 30 minutes and
Okay.
and we have a whole slew of questions. So we just
All right, so let me get through this stuff quick and then we can start having the discussion. So here are the current tools in Nova. We have a forecasting tool that I don't think many people use, but I think this would be time for people like Veronica to show us how to use that forecasting tool, which allows you to project and budget and hit your targets as far as spending. And so that would be important with the carryover legislation. And then at the state level, we do have a threshold percentage that would generate that corrective action flag. So what we'll do is we'll ratchet that down to 0 or 100%, however it works, but making sure that you spend all your money. And so then it would generate a corrective action flag to for members to respond that exceed the straight threshold. And we'll have to look at the strategies of that threshold percentage and the corrective action flag. Can we do that at the quarter? Is there like a percentage we want to hit for each quarter? And that would help the consortia, generate that corrective action flag, because the state level thresholds are for the whole state. So you can't have an individual threshold for each consortia, although maybe that's a forecasting tool can be helpful. And that's probably what we want a better explanation is how these tools kind of work together. How can we set up the state threshold percentage in conjunction with the forecasting tool, so we get these corrective action flags, reminding members like, hey, you're in the danger zone, you better, keep spending, that kind of thing. So I think we have to unpack this and figure it out, but these are good tools. I just don't think we know how they work in conjunction with the carryover language. And so
Yeah.
this is where Cape TAP would come in to help us quite a bit on unpacking this stuff. And then, of course, in your governance section,
Neil?
when you, yes.
I'm sorry. Just right now, this might be a good time for this question, and I think we can say it's maybe too early to know exactly how to respond, but should we adjust our member budget spending targets to 20, 40, 60, and 80 for the 22-23 budget?
I mean, if you have the ability, because I'm not the NOVA expert, and I don't know if Veronica's on this chat or the roundtable discussion, but those are the kind of questions like Cape Tap can help us understand, you know, maybe some takeaways on what you can do now in NOVA to make sure people are aware of it, you know, some adjustments and things like that. Maybe getting those, like if Kelly adjusted those and that kicks in the corrective action response, then you're getting ahead of it, you know, and people are aware, and so they have to do this. So good point. I just wish Veronica was on this chat to kind of explain that. And maybe that's a
Oh, there
follow-up
she
webinar.
comes. You ask and she's there.
I'm here.
Okay, so
And
Veronica,
I've been following along.
can consortia right now adjust the spending percentages for their members to make sure they're aware of this legislation? So
You're
what
talking about when they
what
complete the
tool-
budget.
Yeah, what tools do they have now that can help them eliminate carryover?
So definitely utilize the forecast, set the forecast and budget in the budget and work plan. Right now we have the example where the example carries over 40% into the next year, but members can create whatever forecast they want. Especially if they want it not carry over 20%, then they will set it, as Dana had mentioned, to the 20, 40, 60, 80%. There are no hard numbers that you have to input as of right now. You can do whatever you want. And so it would be advised that you set it. But the follow-up to that is you have to make sure that you're monitoring it with the expenditure reports. And so the expenditure reports are going to show you if your members are hitting those forecasts on a quarterly basis. And if they are not, then working with members to ensure that within the next quarter that they are hitting the intended forecast. So of course you can set it in the budget and work plan, but the true monitoring comes with the expenditure report and following that relatively closely. Hopefully.
Okay, and so it does sound like probably a future webinar is in the works on the forecasting tool. That would be great. Thank you, Veronica.
Mhm.
Okay,
And
so quickly.
John,
oh.
I'm sorry, I saw John Warner had his hand up. John, did you still have a question?
Well, I think, no, Veronica answered that very well.
Okay.
One of the nuances in this that we're all going to have to realize is AB 1491, the 20% applies to your annual allocation, which is different oftentimes than your budget in NOVA. If you've been carrying over money year after year, your budget can be much larger than your allocation. And so I think if you're setting a goal as a school or a member of, hey, we're going to spend 20% of our budget this year, you're very likely going to then exceed the goal of 20% of your allocation, right? But the divisor, or the bottom number in this, the denominator is allocation, your annual allocation. And then your numerator is your expenditures. And so I think that's where it's going to get a little bit nuanced for us to kind of track that out. The expenditure forecast tool it uses a denominator of your budget number.
So John, let me ask you a quick question. So let's say I'm a consortia and my members have carryover from prior years. And so let's say my allocation is $1 million this year and I spend my $1 million, but I have carryover in prior year of like $3 million. Does that get factored into that 20% calculation, the carryover from prior years?
Well, okay, so that's a good question. A lot of people are asking, right? And I think we have to turn to what does the legislation say prima facie? It says 20% of your allocation.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
allocation is a defined number.
Yeah, okay. We'll have to look at that because that would be an important point.
I think
right?
so. Yeah, no, I think we need to look at that. And that's why, I think you said it during opening of this session, Neil. There's a lot of these little pieces that kind of need to be worked out and understood so that we're all on the same page of what they mean. But now's the time to air out all these questions and concerns so that they can be addressed
Right.
by folks.
I think Steve has his hand raised. Steve, do you have a clarification, maybe what was decided in committee on that language?
Yes, and I'm looking it up right now, the specific definition, but I'm trying to stay quiet. I appreciate everybody's questions. Definitely a lot to think about. I think we'll get there. I think these are all, we've struggled with this for the last 2 years, talking about all these different scenarios. John's been on the call, so he's a little way ahead. I would say not a little way ahead on all this, but the basic idea is that whatever you have received in CAPE funding, and specifically CAPE, not WIOA, not CalWORKS, not apportionment for college, it's the CAPE funding, which NOVA does track. It tells you everything you've received. And then whatever's not spent of that at the end of a year, given year, divided by your allocation for that year is what defines your carryover amount.
Okay, so
So
in this scenario, let's say I get 3 million a year and I had $1 million carryover from the prior year and another $1 million from the prior year. So I have 5 million in my budget going forward. I spend the 3 million, but then I have carryover of 2 million, which would be more than the 20%. So is that, does that follow along with your line of thinking with?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, assuming that's the consortium budget. So the 2 million
Mhm.
divided by 3 million, you're at 66% carryover.
Right. Okay. All right. We'll have to flesh this out, but I'm glad you guys we're dialoguing today. So that's great.
Neil, I have a question, or maybe this is for Steve, but like that really makes sense. I just want to make sure we get that kind of in writing or an example in NOVA, because right now, as it reads, it's 20% carryover for like all the years. And I'm still quite unclear of what John mentioned earlier about what your budget is in allocation. Again, the language in the bill stipulates that it's all carryover from, let's say, 21, 22, 22, 23, and then now 23, 24. So if we can get clarity on that in writing or some examples, that would be great. Or maybe
Yeah,
I'm understanding, right? I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think it'll come out in the guidance, but I think you got it clear. And we'll clarify that, but I can't see them allowing the prior year and the prior year and other prior years not being spent down.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we'll provide clarity on that, hopefully sooner rather than later. But I would assume that you have to make sure that prior year carryover is also spent down, because that would factor in. I can't see us not looking at that.
Well, that's how I'm
Neil,
that's how I'm interpreting it. So I
Mhm.
just want to make sure that at least for NLCRC, we are, spending down collectively the 20%.
Right.
That 20%.
Because I think the
Neil,
member,
this is-
the member is focused on your allocation for the year.
Correct.
The consortium is a little different. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm getting confused now. Maybe I should just shut up. John, did you want to say something?
Well, yeah, no, just reinforcing that, what we're all talking about right now is not the guidance policy yet, right? So don't go back from this conversation and start implementing a rule based on a bunch of what ifs that we're doing right now. We've really got to wait for the work teams to figure this out and to put it, I think, you just said, in writing, so we've got it clear, plain as day, what the policy, the implementation level policy is going to translate the egg code to, right? That's got to come still for us all.
And John, the
We're just
critical
kicking
piece,
the tires right now.
yeah, the critical piece that you just said is work group, because I haven't heard a work group on this. So that's something you guys would have to push to get some field involvement in the guidance.
Oh, I think that would be paramount because you need to have the subject matter experts that are actually doing it day to day out in the consortium to help answer the, unintended consequence type questions, right? It helps.
You
Yeah. and then-
think?
John, this is Janet. If we can add, and I did mention earlier about getting in writing, if we can add a difference to whatever degree, because I know that's up to the consortial level and how we treat it when we're a fiscal agent versus when we're direct funded. And I know that we've done that in the past with, the metrics and the member effectiveness, but if we can also integrate that piece into the guidance for that, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, you just made me imagine like a decision tree. Question number one, are you direct funded or are you fiscal agent funded?
Yeah.
Right. And then, well, I'm saying as a tool for consortium to help navigate this, that you almost have like a decision tree of questions. And then, okay, now here's the guidance interpreted to your circumstance or context based on those. And that's just one maybe big consideration. Yeah. That would be a helpful tool.
Yeah, thank you, you guys. Neil, I want to say that we're down to about 15 minutes. So I wanted to maybe hold any additional questions and allow you to get through your slides, and then we can come back and address any questions that remain.
Thanks, Renee.
Yep.
Okay, so quickly, another tool we have when you approve your CFAD in the governance section, what are those 21 questions, 19 questions, whatever they are, number 16 and 17 ask questions about carryover. So you can utilize that to define your carryover policy at the consortia level for members and maybe consortia spending. And then also in our annual plan in the fiscal management section, we have a question on carryover there. So every year when you do your annual plan, you'll have the opportunity to update in the fiscal management section your carryover policy or progress, things related to that. And then Veronica has a good feeling for this. I don't know how many other people have access to Looker reports, but those are the reports that would be available to look at member level carryover and probably as well consortia level carryover. But I think we have to give you guys access and make those available. And that's an ask of the Chancellor's Office and the NOVA programmers, I believe, unless you guys already have Looker access right now, but I don't think so. Veronica would know more about that. Okay, so getting to questions with 15 minutes. Oh, current TA. So right now, what we have available is consortia onboarding. We cover governance, administrative functions. We have targeted technical assistance, coaching. We have NOVA workshops and technical assistance. We also have CFAD governance webinars that we've done. We've also done webinars on member effectiveness. And then more importantly, we have peer learning circles and professional learning communities that could help in this regard. So getting back to our limited time. So the questions, maybe we can open it up. What other tools do you need? What other TA and PD do you need? What should state level guidance look like? And just concerns, fears, and insights in general. And so I'll pause there because I don't want to take up any more time. We want to hear from you.
There was a question in the chat. I'm looking for it right now, but it referenced what will the impact be to consortia if they consecutively carry over more than 20%? Will the state be able to take away money?
So remember, it's the members that have the consecutive year. The consortia is every year, 20%. So I don't know what that sanction will look like. I mean, it says we're going to review your spending plan, we're going to review your funding, we're going to review your services. Who knows? Maybe if the consortium continues to fall over that 20%, maybe the state will take action. That's an unknown, but it could happen. And I'm not going to say it will happen, but it could. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, can I add just a comment on that, Neil?
Sure.
That was very clear. We were in speaking with legislature, and they did put language in that the intent is that the funds would remain in the region. They would never leave the region. So however the state decides to grapple with that piece, But I could see, and this, I know this was an issue a few years ago, and I don't know if it's still an issue. We had other players out there in the adult education field providing services that are not funded through CAPE dollars, that they could come to the table and say, well, we would like some of that money to support our services. So, you know, there's different ways to get the funding spent if the current members aren't spending the money. But it was pretty clear, and the legislature was very supportive of the idea that the remains stay local to the region. Now, if like Neil said, if the state redefines the region, then that could change that. But I think that was a priority for them. That the funds would not leave just because the current members aren't able to spend the funding.
All right, thanks, Steve.
So there is also some discussion in the chat, started, I think, with Sherry Watkins about how we've always been told that we have 30 months to spend each allocation. And the colleges especially have a different structure for how they spend their CAPE allocation, and usually take 2 years to spend 1 year of funding. And they are working on changing that, but it may be an issue with other colleges as well. And several people are agreeing with her and saying that you know, they would be happy to start a focus group or be involved with a focus group that kind of looks at the guidance for this.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, historically, we've seen that, but there's new language in town, so to speak, and so we're gonna have to deal with this. And although the spending mechanisms vary depending on what district you're in and what type of district, we're just all gonna have to, you know, maybe get together and figure out how to adhere to these new rules. So yeah, I agree, Sherry, but this changes everything, so to speak.
And Kelly asked if there are any consortia that have examples of bylaws that deal with carryover, or examples of consortia admin procedures that they can take a look at. I don't know if there's anybody on this session that can speak to that or not.
Yeah, this is Janice from NLCRC. We do have ours, and it's posted on our website. So if you go to nlcrc.ae.adulted.org, we have guidelines on carryover, one-time expenditures, and repurposing of funds.
Thank you, Janice.
Yeah, so Renee, I kind of went through that governance question 16 and 17 on the CFAD. And I didn't see, and maybe Janae is the exception, I didn't see a lot of new guidance around carryover. So this bill will force everyone to deal with the carryover situation.
Mm-hmm. Corinne, you were asking, can you put this website in the chat? Can you tell me what website you're looking for? Oh, I'm sorry. Probably
I'm sorry,
Janice.
it's
Janice.
the NOCE. Janice just talked about.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Renee.
I'm putting it into the chat box right now. I'm just grabbing the
Oh,
URL.
great.
Thank you, Jana.
Of course.
So there's also some messaging about just, you know, having some grace, understanding that we're coming off of, you know, more than a year of struggle, you know, with the pandemic and running things remotely and not having as many students, you know, as a result. And, you know, could there or would there be any grace in this?
So I think there's grace. You can give yourself grace at the member level because you have that flexibility. At the consortia level, that's up to the state. So hopefully through your discussions and like John was saying, some field input, you can express your concerns given those situations that the state guidance for consortia 20% reflects your concerns.
Mm-hmm. And Janae, I think brings up a good question, and I think we need to reaffirm that. Let me read it first. She said, I'm concerned about bringing this info to my leadership board with so many unknowns. Do we have any idea about work groups being formed before the state puts out guidance in January?
No, I haven't heard of that, but what time is that session with Carolyn and Gary Adams today. That's 2:00.
Correct, yes. Mhm.
Yeah, that would be a good time to bring that up.
Mhm. Yeah, but I also think, Janae, that, just kind of a word of caution about what you share, that this is, again, this is all still at the discussion stage, that there has been no guidance, no formal guidance released from the state.
Yeah, and John said, I think it's a great time to sunrise the new rule and begin thinking about potential operational impacts.
Yeah, Neil, I just add to that, so we've started doing that in our consortium with both our board and our leadership committee, which is kind of the working task force to make sure everything works well. It's all the administrators. We know there aren't answers right now to a lot of our questions, but we want everyone to know that here's what AB 1491 said, and here's some, maybe let's brainstorm some potential impacts that we need to start considering now as a consortium in our governance. We don't know what our new governance language will say in our bylaws. We know it's going to need to change, though, and that's a good place to be for us right now. And I would say for others, that's probably not a bad place to be.
Right. And then I was just thinking, so let's say the state runs in October of next year, the consortia report, and we have like 32 consortia that are over the 20%. And I don't see the state having the bandwidth to deal with that. And then I don't see the state handing over a fiscal review to a contractor either. So that stuff has to be dealt with and unpacked on what's realistic. And so those kind of discussions need to happen as well. We don't know the magnitude, and that's why we have to probably start writing reports now to see, what are we talking about with workload? What does that look like, and how are we going to deal with that? And do we set up guidance that is so involved that it's just going to, wear us out? We won't have the bandwidth to deal with it, and we won't do a good job of it. So just things that I was thinking about. And we have 8 minutes left.
And Dr. Olinger has her hand up.
Yeah, Neil, so I'm wondering, AB 1491 is for adult ed. Are there any carryover laws for the other funding, for example, the community college or, our K-12 system? Or are we just the one who brought this in as a bill? And
I'm just thinking, so with apportionment, do you, for community colleges, do you guys have to spend that money all within the same year? Or LCFF, if anybody knows LCFF, is there a carryover provision for LCFF? Not for apportionment?
This is Janice. For LCFF, I know this because I work directly with our K-12 partner. They do have a carryover.
Okay.
And it's treated the same way, similar to CAPE.
Okay. And Madeline says so Madeline, are you saying there's not a carryover provision for apportionment for non-credit? So they can't carry it over, it goes back to the state? Or are you saying there's no carryover provision and they can carry the money over?
Sorry, I can't turn my camera on where I'm at because I'm in 2 Zooms, but it's not really apportionment. That's like a carryover thing. What it is instructional budget. So if you get an instructional budget and that's what you use to pay your faculty, that doesn't, once the year's over, it's done. You don't get to say, well, I didn't use 100,000 of my carryover of my instructional budget. I get to carry it over. That's not how it is. So
Okay.
Yeah, you have to use whatever your budget is.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. Feel free to put your comments in as far as TA needs, tools that you think we'll need, professional development, peer learning circles, I don't know, whatever you think would be important. And then Cape Tap can save the chat and we can take this forward as we pursue further clarification on, how we're going to develop the state level guidance, who's going to be involved, what will that look like? And then when will these new tools be available for the field?
Mhm.
You answered my question, Veronica. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining our session. I'm going to go ahead and put the evaluation link in chat, and then I hope you enjoy the rest of our summit. Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Renee, but I'm going to put the evaluation in now, and then if you want to keep going, that's great with me.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm not seeing additional questions in the chat at this time. I don't know if anybody else wants to come off of mute with any last questions. A lot of thank yous.
Yeah, if there's a primal scream that you want to do, feel free to do that.
Thank you.
If there's any gossip that you want to share, you come off of mute and share that as well.
I heard this AB 1491 was just a big Neil ploy to get an early retirement out of it.
Yeah, I'm going to take all the
Money.
carryover. I'm going to my Cayman Island account.
I think you started that rumor, Ed.
Okay, well, we'll get through this. Hopefully, and then just last comments, we'll need your help to keep this ship going in the right direction. I could see where this could go off course. It'd be very difficult. So everyone, that was part of this has to be mindful that we're all in this together, and we got to work together to keep this, in a way that it's helpful and easy for us to implement, easy for you to implement, that kind of thing. So
Neil, last question. It's Yolene. So I wrote in our general chat yesterday's suggestion maybe to have a jam session for anyone who's interested about concerns, and I don't see that we have created any jam sessions or anything. Is there any interest at all? I know John Werner is here, and Ed yesterday had suggested maybe have a jam session for the concerns that were not addressed yesterday. And I just felt like people were a little bit frustrated, and I think it's important that we continue to have this really, a professional ethos of good communication. Is that a good way to say that?
I would think so. Renee or Veronica, is there a way to set up a jam session at maybe 1:30 today, 1:30 to 2, prior to the 2 o'clock session for people to come together? Is that possible?
Yeah, today that is not possible.
Okay.
I would like to suggest that, or just remind people that at 2 o'clock today, Carolyn and Gary will be hosting a mini session, which would be a very appropriate spot to bring up any questions or concerns that you might have related to this topic or others. I'm sorry, 2:30? I apologize.
And then what you could do, Yulene, you could set up your own kind of Zoom call outside of this, maybe to get together and discuss things, if you wanted to do that before that afternoon session.
Okay, that sounds good. And I was just wondering, let me know if you're interested, and I'll just email you and create a Zoom.
Do you want to put your email in the chat, Dr.
Sure.
Ollinger? Okay.
Easy, eollinger@mendocino.edu.
Okay, so if anybody wants to, and then John put his email in there. So if anybody wants to join John and Dr. Ollinger for a little coffee clutch, primal scream, feel free.
Okay, thank you.
All right, there's so look for I'm assuming
Is there-
someone's
Neil,
capturing
this is
these
John.
emails.
Yeah, is there a way we could get the folks that are listen their emails forwarded to us. Maybe we could get the chat transcript forwarded to us. And Dr. Ollinger, I would be more than happy to work with you on setting up a web meeting virtually where we could get folks from the field together that want to talk about, some concerns that they may have.
I think it's really important that we do that, John. And I think this is we want to create that space. And I think we learned that from the plenary speaker, Ken Shelton. And I think we can practice something like this. And again, I'm willing to facilitate. I don't have the answers, and I venture you don't have either. But I think for us to just have the space to hear the voices of what's from our colleagues. So I just saved my chat, and let's see if we can work it out.
Yeah, you can absolutely save your chat. Everybody should be able to do that by clicking on within the chat where you would be typing in the right-hand side and the 3 dots. You just click on that, and then you should be able to save your chat right there.
I wish I had some good slogans from Ken's presentation that I could throw at you before we close, but there were so many of them. But yeah, you're right. We have to do this together. So appreciate it.
All
Thank
right.
you, everyone. Thank you, Renee.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, have a great rest of the summit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.